Senate Transportation Committee will come to order. Clerk will call the roll.
Nichols.
Here.
Hancock.
Here.
Alvarado. Hinojosa. Colhorst. Perry.
Here.
Rodriguez. Schwartner. West.
Here.
The quorum is present.
Members will be, and audience will be meeting here on Wednesdays at 8 a.m. My intention to, typically, when we hear our bills, we'll hear the bills. We won't vote them out. We'll wait a week and see if we're going to vote them out the following week. If we have committee substitutes, I will try to promise you to give you plenty of time to see committee substitutes before they're laid out. I don't like somebody to bring a committee substitute and lay it out and the audience not know what's done. So we'll try to give you more than 24 hours whenever possible. We'll also try to minimize voting at the desk just for emergencies toward the end of the session. Does any other members have any opening comments they'd like to make? No? We got some new members. I'm really tickle jar here. On the transportation staff, Amy Jeter is the committee director. Jonathan Ortega, who's been with me, they've both been with me for a good while. He's a policy director. I've got Gabriel Ochoa. There he is, back there. And Julianne Newman over here. So would y'all like to introduce any of your staff?
No.
Carol would.
I guess seems like the thing to do. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. I'm very pleased to be on the committee and serving with you. With me is Audrey, who will be our point person, along with Alex Hammond, my chief of staff. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, it's good to be with you again. I have Shannon Harmon with me. I have 2 other hearings scheduled at 8 a.m. on Wednesdays as we currently speak, so you may see Shannon actually voting for me at this level, at some level, but no, you're in good hands with her. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's an honor to serve with you again and vice chair of this committee as your vice chair of Business and Commerce. So
That's commission 2 week. We're each other's wingman.
Or worked out well. I have a much better wingman than you do. I will tell you that. And I'm pleased to announce Adam Leggett, chief of staff, been with me ever since I got into the Senate, and transportation ever since we got in the Senate. So anyway, he knows it better than I do, and look forward to being on the committee again.
Mr. Chairman, I'm glad to be a freshman member of this committee and look forward to working with each and every one of you. I have Kelvin Bass back in the back, who's been my transportation person since I've been in the Senate.
Senator Hinojosa.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members. I'm glad to be back on the committee. I really enjoy this committee and trying to focus on the needs of our state, the infrastructure, our roads. So I'm very happy to be back. My staff person is not here right now. Jerry Haddican could be my staff person. He used to be our general counsel, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, members, you've received a copy of the proposed committee rules. These are the same rules the committee had under the 85th session with a slight modification that all the committees have made that same modification. Is there any discussion, any questions on the rules? Senator Hancock moves committee rules to be adopted. Clerk will call the row.
Nichols. Hancock.
Here.
Alvarado. Hinojosa. Colhorst. Perry. Rodriguez. Schwartner. West. 6 ayes, no nays.
There being 6 ayes and no nays, committee rules are adopted. Invited testimony members, we're going to have here invited testimony from a few of our agencies who will provide us with an update. So first we have Texas Department of Transportation, Commissioner Chairman Bugg, James Bass, Executive Director, Ryan Ragland, Brian Barth. Did you have anybody else you want to bring up? Okay. Well, Chairman Bugg, we're very pleased you're here today.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
I understand you have a speaking engagement at the governor's.
I do.
And so he'll I think he's going to make some he can wait.
This is my first priority of the day. Absolutely. Chairman Nichols, would you like for me to begin?
Yes, yes, sir.
Okay. Well, good morning. Chairman Nichols, thank you for inviting me to appear before your Senate Transportation Committee this morning. I'm looking forward to working with all of you. I see a lot of familiar faces, a lot of friends sitting up there. We've worked on different things together, and we'll continue to work together on things. And Senator Perry, we'll get to know each other, and Senator Alvarado, I look forward to getting to meet you and work with you this session. Well, I just wanted to, I guess I should say, for the record, my name is J. Bruce Bugg, Jr. I serve as chairman of the Texas Transportation Commission. And as I said, I am honored to be here this morning to visit with you. The way I think we're going to work together is, we all have a shared responsibility, and we all have a deep love of the state of Texas, and that's where we're all starting from. And we know from the state demographer that the population of Texas is projected to double between now and 2050 to 54 million in population. With that, we know that Texas is still the job-creating engine of the entire United States, and we know that economic development and job creation are key to our future here in the state of Texas. We also know we're the 11th largest economy in the world, larger than Australia and larger than Russia. So there's huge policy implications for transportation against this backdrop. And against this backdrop, what your Texas Department of Transportation is working on currently is we are maintaining the 196,000 lane miles throughout the state of Texas. We are working on congestion relief in our 5 major metropolitan areas with a new program called Texas Clear Lanes. I look around and I see a number of people that have attended our groundbreakings, and soon we're going to have many more completions, and we'll celebrate opening lane miles to the driving public of the state of Texas, and that's what we're dedicated to do. Good morning, Senator Colcourse. And so we also, not only are we taking care of our 196,000 lane miles throughout the state of Texas and our congestion, we're focused on Texas Clear Lanes for congestion relief in our major metropolitan areas, but we're continuously trying to balance the needs of rural Texas and urban and what those competing needs are. And the point of all that is that this is where the shared responsibility is. We're trying to do our part to execute on the taxpayer funds that, with your leadership, Chairman Nichols, and the leadership of this Senate Transportation Committee, are able to provide the Texas Department of Transportation. We are keenly aware that taxpayer dollars are precious, and we're keenly aware of the competing needs of how to address the transportation needs, as I said, both in rural and urban Texas. And so we are committed and dedicated to that. I'm honored today to be representing my fellow commissioners. I'm honored to be representing the 12,000 men and women of TxDOT who are dedicated to these goals of how do we address the transportation needs, not only of Texas today, but planning for Texas tomorrow. And so we'll work together on that. My commitment as chairman to you is that I'm very focused on making sure that we take these precious dollars. We're trying to move projects forward. We had our Congestion Relief Task Force meeting yesterday, and the main theme of our monthly meeting, but it was kind of brought to bear, is that we're trying to identify how can we continuously take funds that are available not only through the commission but have been allocated under Category 2 and other categories throughout the state. How can we move these projects that are in the UTP forward? How many of these have the environmental clearance, the right-of-way, the utilities, all the things that might sound mundane, but they're absolutely key and central to being able to get things done. And so I'm very focused on how do we improve efficiencies and effectiveness with our taxpayer dollars to get these projects moving. So that's my commitment to you as chairman of the Texas Transportation Commission, is I am personally dedicated to these goals and objectives. And in terms of just, you might say, well, how are you doing so far? Today I will sign letters going to each of you and each of the other members of the Texas Legislature for this report card. I believe it's on slide 2 of your report, but you'll receive a copy of this with my cover letter. And one of the key things that we all know is we can't do our job without funding, and y'all have provided the leadership. And I'm looking particularly at Chairman Nichols, because with your leadership on Proposition 1 and Proposition 7 of our $75 billion Unified Transportation Program that we adopted last August, a full $33 billion of the $75 billion comes from Proposition 1 and Proposition 7. Now, just to put that in percentages, pardon me, that's 44% of our 10-year construction budget. I call the UTP our 10-year construction budget. So thank you, Senator Nichols, and thank you for all the members here of the Senate Transportation Committee, because as you know, without these streams of income that we can rely on, and I'm a banker by background, and we all know that in order to plan these long-lived projects, we have to have the assurance that these funds are going to be coming in. We look to the federal and the state highway gas tax, and that's a pretty predictable stream of income. Proposition 7 is sales tax, as we know. Proposition 1 is severance tax. But all these streams are so important to our ability to plan and to execute and deliver the projects for the people of the state of Texas. And my only ask of you is please continue to help us have these funding streams so that we can do the job that I think you will be proud of at the Texas Department of Transportation. So thank you for the opportunity to visit with you this morning, to introduce myself. I do look forward to working with you this session. I'm available to answer your questions, and if there are no questions right now, I'll turn it over to our very capable Executive Director, James Bass.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any questions of Chairman Bug? No? Also, while I'm on the mic, let the record show that Senator Colcourse is here, Senator Rodriguez is here, and we've got Hinojosa a while ago. So thank you. I know you had mentioned earlier you've got to give a speech somewhere, I think at the Governor's Mansion.
I'm presenting a speech in a little while at the Governor's
Mansion. So he's going to be stepping out shortly. Also, just so that y'all know, he and Executive Director Bass and some of the others, we get together on a very regular basis, usually every 2 months, 3 months, and we really dig into a lot of what's going on and what we think might be the weak spots and what we need to do going forward. And so we don't just meet when we have committee meetings or during session. This goes on year-round with these members.
Well, thank you, Chairman Nichols, because that communication back and forth is essential so we can kind of work together, and I appreciate the time that you give me, and I appreciate the time that you give our staff at TxDOT. It's very important.
Well, thank you. And those funding streams, that was a hard-won battle by all the members of the Senate and the House, with the leadership of Lieutenant Governor as well as the Governor. It wouldn't have happened otherwise. So,
thank you, sir.
Thank you. James?
For the record, I'm James Bass, Executive Director at the Texas Department of Transportation, and for the remainder of our presentation, we'll be walking through this PowerPoint slide deck that you should have before you. And so, on slide 3, I'd like to highlight a tragic streak that has been going on in the state of Texas for far too long. And if you look at the state of Texas and wonder when is the last day that we had a day without a fatality on Texas roads, that was Election Day of the year 2000. So it has been over 18 years since the state of Texas experienced a day without a fatality on our roadways. You can see here in 2017 we had 3,727 people pass away on our roadways, and we show some of the statistics of the primary causes of those fatalities. One thing I will highlight is we also do another survey of how many people wear a seatbelt in Texas. And the current statistic shows 92% wear a seatbelt, obviously meaning that 8% do not. So if we look at these statistics of fatalities on the roadways, some of those are pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorcyclists, importantly meaning they don't have an option to wear a seatbelt. If we remove them from the math, 40% of the fatalities had a primary cause of people not wearing a seatbelt. So that 8% of the population, that chooses not to wear a seatbelt equates to around 40% of the fatalities of those who had a choice. So the last note I will say on this is every rider, every ride, wear a seatbelt. There's nothing more you can do to increase the odds of surviving in case you are in the unfortunate incident of having a crash on our roadways. One of the things that we're doing now is an initiative in the Streak, Texas. You'll see that coming from the department. We are a strong believer that that is a shared responsibility, not only of the department through our engineering exercises, but education of driver awareness, and then also law enforcement to make sure that we can get people to and from where they need to go safely. Sliding to slide 4, just a brief overview of the department's organization. We are led by a 5-member Transportation Commission appointed by the governor. We have 25 geographic districts, and this is where the heart of the work and kind of the pulse of the department rest each and every day is our 25 districts who are maintaining the roadways, planning projects, and inspecting and delivering those projects. Then in Austin, we have a number of support divisions that work to support the districts in delivering on that mission. If we move to slide 5, you can see our organization chart, and I won't go into too much detail other than to highlight. You can see a critical position within that, obviously, is our chief engineer, who oversees all the engineering divisions and our districts on a daily basis. And so for a lot of the accomplishments that Chairman Buggs spoke about and that are listed on slide 2, that team is led on a daily basis by Bill Hell, our chief engineer, making sure that we're putting all of the funding to good use throughout the state.
Yep, Senator West.
Could you just, not right now, but put the individuals and contact information in the boxes here and
Sure.
send them to me, would you please?
Yes, sir. We'll certainly do that. We then move to slide 6. We show the goals of the department, and that is to promote safety, preserve our assets, focus on the customer, make sure that we're delivering the right projects by working with local elected officials and metropolitan planning organizations. We want to make sure that we're good stewards of the resources that we've been given, so we foster stewardship. We value our employees, and of course we look to optimize the performance of our system. Now, one thing, in the early 90s, our name was changed, and we are a Department of Transportation, so we are more than just highways. And on slide 7, it shows some of our responsibilities in the non-highway modes. We are responsible for providing state funding and federal funding grants to general aviation airports. We provide public transportation grants to small urban and rural transit providers. We also are responsible for rail planning and safety. The state owns the South Orient Railroad, and we manage that asset on behalf of the state. We also manage the state-owned aircraft fleet. The old aircraft pooling board was transferred to TxDOT several years ago. We have ferry operations in Port Aransas and Galveston. We're the federal sponsor for the Gulf Intercoastal Waterway, and we operate travel information centers. One thing I will highlight at the bottom of this page, it notes that of the revenue sources that are deposited to the State Highway Fund, roughly 97% of those are dedicated to highways. And so oftentimes when we go out and visit with communities, we're asked, why aren't we doing more in a certain area? Oftentimes it comes down to what we would refer to as the color of money. And the point is, we are a Department of Transportation, but the vast significance of our funding is related and dedicated to highways. On slide 8, I mentioned safety earlier. We have highway safety efforts, designing the system to be as safe as possible. We collect crash data. Law enforcement officers submit their crash data to us, and we have that in a database, so we're able to analyze that and spot perhaps intersections where there may be a high number of incidents, and then we need to go in and analyze that to see if there's an improvement needed in that particular stretch of roadway. We do the driver safety programs, the click it or ticket, plan ahead, in the street campaigns, and then also the rail safety program for railroad highway crossings, and also the state safety oversight. Another role that the department plays is in disaster and emergency preparedness, response, and recovery. Most recently, that occurred in response to Hurricane Harvey. We believe that with our skilled workforce, our engineering capabilities, and our presence really across the state and almost every county, we're well positioned to provide that to the citizens of Texas. Some of the things that we did during Hurricane Harvey and the response to that, we did high water rescue. Obviously, we did traffic sign and signal repair. We did debris cleanup both on the state highway system and off of the state highway system. A tool that we use for the first time is an installation of an aquadam, which is basically a bladder that we would take out and pump some of the flood water into the bladder and expand it. That allowed us to open lanes of highway days ahead of when we otherwise would have been able to, and we'll have that available to us going forward.
Yep.
Well, I don't know what it was.
It's hard to move.
Was it fracking or what?
I think it's completely unrelated to the department. I just want to make sure everybody.
We may need a bladder then.
And then obviously we update the public through our dynamic message signs, and then also updates to our drivetexas.org website that gives the public insight into the conditions of our roadways and whether they're closed or experiencing flooding conditions. On slide 7, I just wanted to highlight there, and I realize that on the map on the right-hand side, you're not going to be able to see the detail, but the point is there are a number of toll facilities in the state of Texas. There are a number of sections of transportation code that deal with those entities separately. The department is the lone statewide toll authority, and we do operate some toll roads, but obviously there are many other toll entities in the state responsible for certain toll facilities in their areas. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Brian Barth, who will talk about our project planning and how we work with locals to select projects and advance them.
Thanks, James. Brian Barth, Director of Project Planning and Development. So I'm going to go through a couple slides talking about our project planning process. Our process is a collaborative process working with elected officials, metropolitan planning organizations, other local planning organizations, and the public to make sure we're delivering the right projects at the right time. Our process is the Unified Transportation Program. It's our 10-year guide that guides project development over that 10-year period. The Unified Transportation Program is now required by state law, and the way we go through performance-based planning and performance-based project selection was put into statute 2 sessions ago in House Bill 20. The UTP does not guarantee that projects will be built, but it authorizes TxDOT and other partnering agencies to begin preparing for their delivery. In addition to highway projects, the UTP also discusses public transportation, maritime, aviation, rail programs, as well as a section on freight and international trade. I will remind everyone that the note that James mentioned earlier, that 97% of our funds are dedicated to highways. The Unified Transportation Program is organized into 12 categories that each address a specific type of our program. And again, they authorize transportation dollars expected to be available over the next 10 years. On the next slide, slide 13, are those 12 funding categories, and this is the distribution that was in our 2019 Unified Transportation Program that was approved last August. We go through a process based on, we look at a number of different distribution of these funding categories and determine what those estimated performance outcomes are after the 10-year period to try to guide us and the commission on how this distribution should work. There are, some of these categories are, have federal requirements behind them, specifically Category 7 and Category 5. One thing to note, the Category 1, Preventive Maintenance and Rehabilitation, and Category 6, the Bridge category, that is essentially how we maintain our system across the state. I don't know if it was mentioned earlier, but we have over 54,000 bridges in the state. That's much more than any other state in the country. We also, because of I'm proud of our bridge division and the work that they do in our districts around the state and the resources that you have provided us. But we have fewer by percentage bridges that are in need of repair than any other state also. So we have the most bridges and the fewest that are in need of repair. On the next slide, I would just like to point you to our project tracker. If you are interested in learning about our projects, you don't have to download the whole Unified Transportation Program for our website. You can go to Project Tracker, and you can search projects by a number of criteria, including your Senate district if you choose to do that by putting that in the search field up in the upper left corner. I'm going to turn it over to Brian Ragland now.
Good morning. I'm Brian Ragland, Chief Financial Officer of TxDOT. I'm going to talk a little bit about our budget this morning and some of our revenue streams and how we use those, as well as some of the asks we have in the process right now with the Finance Committee. So on page 15, there's a pie chart that allocates how we use our money. The $32.68 billion total is an estimate of our 2020-21 budget. The top line item labeled Other Modes and Services is directly related to that slide number 7 where James talked about the non-highway activities that the department does. The rest of the items are directly related to highway improvement projects. And so, as you can see, the bulk of our money goes toward project development and delivery as well as maintenance. Proposition 1 and Proposition 7 are called out separately as uses of funding, and that's because of our budget structure. Those are individual strategies, but obviously those contain some of the same activities of project development, project delivery, and maintenance. The next page, 16, is a pie chart that takes the same amount of money and breaks it down by the sources of funding. And so a large amount of our money comes from federal reimbursements. Of course, we have Proposition 1 and Proposition 7, which I'll talk to in a little bit more detail on later slides. The State Highway Fund, our traditional sources of revenue are primarily the motor fuels tax and vehicle registration fees. The motor fuel tax, the gas tax is 20 cents a gallon. The State Highway Fund gets 15 cents of that. The other nickel goes to education. What you won't see on this chart are any bond funds. We have completely exhausted and expended, or will have by the end of this biennium, all prior bond programs. So we are no longer making use of any bond funds from those previous authorizations.
Okay, Brian,
Yes,
a couple of questions. On page 15, when you say paid back borrowed funds, are those bond funds?
Those are paying back previous bond issuances.
Right. Okay.
But we are no longer using bond funds.
Debt service?
Yeah, debt service.
Okay.
But we're no longer paying for projects with bonds.
On page 16, question. When we use federal funds, are we obligated to use federal regulations to expend those funds, even if those funds are commingled with state funds?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the federal requirement supersedes the state?
any project that has federal funding has to be developed under federal guidelines.
All right, thank you.
Moving on, page number 17, these are our current priorities in the budget process. I will note that these are all things that would be funded with the State Highway Fund. There is no general revenue related to these items, so there is no cost to the bill. But we do need explicit authority because these are primarily capital budget items, and then there's one other. The first one is our Austin campus consolidation. We have several locations here in Austin, the primary being our Riverside campus, and the leases are expiring starting in 2022, and so we're gonna have to relocate. And so this project would put about 2,000 employees at a consolidated campus in southeast Austin. We have received prior appropriations from the legislature to buy the land, which we have done, and to begin design and site preparation for that campus. So the amount you see here, $23.8 million, would be the amount payable to the Texas Public Finance Authority during the biennium under an agreement with them to finance the total cost of the campus. Item number 2 is a request for additional FTEs, 313.5. Last session, the agency in its LAR asked for 627 FTEs, and we were granted half of those. And so this is the second half of that same request from last session. The next...
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Senator Hinojosa.
And the reason for this FTE is very important. We actually increased the funding by quite a bit through the Proposition 1, Proposition 7, I think. And so you have to have this staff people to be able to handle the amount of money and the number of new projects that are coming online.
Correct.
Yes, and if you look back, Senator, to I think it was around 2010 or 11, our commission at that time, looking at our 10-year UTP, they realized that the then bonding programs were going to reach their conclusion. So if you looked at the second half of that 10-year program, it was greatly diminished. And so at that time, our commission turned back in roughly 2,000 FTEs, and then 4 and 5 years later, Prop 1 and Prop 7 came back in that raised the level. So we're not asking for all 2,000 of those FTEs back, but a total of 627 in kind of 2 bites, if you will, 313 last session, and then the remainder this session.
Yeah, well, thank you for the explanation. I think it's very important that the committee really understands, and we have, because we just testimony before about the need to rep up or increase your FTEs to be able to deal with the new construction projects now with the flow of revenue coming in. Thank you.
Let the record show Senator Schwartner's here. Thank you. Okay, go on.
So continuing on page 17, item number 3 is a request for money to repair and rehabilitate our facilities around the state. The need is actually much larger than that, but that is the amount that we think we could reasonably accomplish during the two-year budget window. Item number 4 is construction of building facilities. That label is a little misleading in that those would not be new locations, but they would be replacing current buildings that are so far gone that it makes good sense to replace them versus continue to repair them. And then item number 5 is some land associated with those buildings. And then finally, item number 6 are some IT requests that would be capital budget items. Our total request was $195 million. Senate Bill 1 did budget 112 of that, so the remaining ask is $82 million. And of course, we have a lot more detail on those items should you need it.
You're talking about Senate Bill 1 as laid out the other
as
day.
introduced.
Okay,
yes.
Thanks.
Page 18 goes into a little bit more detail about Proposition 1 and how it works. Proposition 1 does expire at the end of 2024. Of course, the source is oil and gas severance taxes. It is very volatile, and it is subject to discretion from the legislature because of the sufficient balance of the Economic Stabilization Fund and the impact that has on the Proposition 1 funding to the State Highway Fund. The right-hand side is a graphic that describes how the mechanics work. After some 1987 thresholds are met, 25% of that amount above goes into the General Revenue Fund, and then the remaining 75% gets split evenly between the Economic Stabilization Fund and the State Highway Fund. And then there's a table
while we're
that
on Prop
shows
1, the first thing you pointed out about the expiration date, that was a sunset date that was put in. We weren't sure how all this would work because we've never really done it before. That's not in the constitutional amendment, it's in enabling legislation. And it really needs to be eliminated, in my opinion, and we need to do it this session, because if we come back in 2021, that thing's going to be expiring at the end of the following session. And it puts them in a predicament in that, since we're doing a 10-year plan, the years after 2024 in the 10-year plan, do we go ahead and plan and develop, or do we not plan and develop? And you would probably have difference of opinion. I'm saying, yeah, you need to go ahead and plan with the assumption that we're going to renew. But in effect, if we got there, somebody else would argue, why are you spending money on something that you knew this thing was going to expire? So that's the predicament they're in. Okay, good.
The table of revenues on the left-hand side kind of speaks to the volatility of this fund source. The 20 and 21 figures are obviously estimates from the Comptroller's biennial revenue estimate. And then on page 19 is a
Senator West.
And this may or may not be appropriate for right now, but I also know that in terms of public school finance, we're looking at the use of some of these funds in order as a source of stable revenue for the future. Is it, at this time, should we discuss that at this point?
You're talking about the Economic Stabilization Fund?
Yes.
Yeah. This money does not come out of the ESF or the rainy day fund. It's split with the deposit when there's a sufficient balance. So the fund, when you hear projections, it'll be at $15 billion. This doesn't impact that at all.
Oh, this is before that.
This is before that.
The one where it may come in, if the legislature were to choose to appropriate out of the Economic Stabilization Fund, in theory, it could drop below the sufficient balance of the rainy day fund, such that the future deposit that would be scheduled to go to the State Highway Fund could be diminished until the rainy day fund was filled back up to that sufficient balance.
And so I think it may be not right now since we're just going over it, but I think we need to kind of look at this.
Sure.
In terms of the ramifications.
All right.
Future plan.
Make sure they all sit.
Yep. Okay.
So page 19 is a similar page that speaks to Proposition 7. Proposition 7 has two parts to it. The first part being the first $2.5 billion that comes in from sales and use tax above $28 billion. And then the second part, which takes effect starting in 2020, is 35% of the amount above $5 billion of motor vehicle sales and rental tax. Proposition 7 also has some expiration dates. The second part I mentioned expires in 2029, and the general sales tax portion expires in 2032. It is eligible to be used not only on highway improvement projects, but also for debt service on previously issued bonds. And the legislature has taken that option in the prior biennium as well as in the introduced version of the budget bills. And then the legislature, with a 2/3 vote in both houses, can decrease this funding by 50%. I will mention that the motor vehicle sales taxes are not coming to fruition as originally estimated when the bill was passed and the proposition was passed. The biennial revenue estimate contains 0 from that source for both years of this upcoming biennium. And so there's a similar table on the left-hand side that shows
It was a
previous.
growth curve. It was a pretty steady growth curve, and so we projected a point, and we purposely picked a point further out to get us through a budget cycle. We thought we would be getting some. Remember, we did this several years back, and so the sales have been a little bit lower than we thought. So it'll kick in a year or two later.
Is this SB 5 or was it?
7.
7. The other one was 5.
The other one, I'm sorry.
It's SB 5. Which one was SB 5? Didn't you have one that was SB 5?
No. Oh, they were both 5. Yeah.
The double nickel.
7 was Senate Bill 5, and it was SJR 5. 5.
And then my last page is page 20, which puts Prop 1 and Prop 7 together and shows you how much has been received to date from each of those sources. The blue drops are Proposition 1, which went into effect a lot earlier. Proposition 7, we just started receiving revenue in the fall of 2018. We did receive the full $2.5 billion. And so the totals, less amounts dedicated to debt service, is about $7.3 billion life to date that we've been able to commit or in the process of committing to highway improvement projects.
Then on the next slide, I just wanted to give a quick update. Last session, the department went through the sunset process, and so we reported last fall to Sunset, and SAO came in. And SAO sampled and verified 12 of 12 that we had fully implemented of the action plans. And then the Sunset Commission report that was released last month noted that we had implemented 25 items, and then there were 8 other items that remained in progress. Many of those 8 other items were working with other entities, or it had a deadline of the end of the biennium for action, but I think they will all be fully implemented by the end of this biennium. The last 2 slides that we had on 22 and 23 was just, I think all of your offices hopefully have already received what we refer to as kind of an educational series, binder. All of that material is also available on our website, and it's kind of compartmentalized, kind of issue by issue. If you want to delve into a particular issue, it'll give you an introduction to that issue, and then if you would like to have further conversations, obviously we can bring over a subject matter expert and get into whatever depth that you would like to. And as part of that education series, we have a transportation funding in Texas brochure that we've put together that we hope you find to be very informative. And again, if there's any questions or follow-ups that you would like on that or any other issues, we stand ready to assist any and all members as you work through this legislative session.
Okay, members, any questions? Left or right? Senator Rodriguez?
I have just a few questions, and I want to go back to slide 13, which lists the various categories of funding with planning targets for 2019. Category 3 is estimated non-traditional and federal earmark funds. Is Category 3 funding all come from the federal government?
No, a lot.
Does it include other sources?
It includes other sources. I'd say probably a large chunk of that is from local governments. So oftentimes when we're working to deliver a project, a city or a county, in hopes of potentially advancing a project, they'll provide funding to fill the funding gap, and that will show up in this Category 3.
I see. Okay. And are there differing requirements in terms of planning and preparation for each one of these categories? I mean, for example, at what phase is a project eligible for funding, and does this differ with different categories?
So I think one thing to highlight is this is a planning document, and so I think generally speaking projects are eligible to be listed in here to begin the development the project development process. What'll happen, and you highlighted a point we should have mentioned earlier that potentially is confusing. The UTP represents really just a subset of our overall budget, and it really represents contractor payments. So if a project is 7 years out and it receives funding in the UTP, what that does is it opens up other parts of our budget, say for right-of-way acquisition and professional engineering, to begin to happen to develop that project. So when we get 7 years into the future, it's fully developed and ready to go to construction. And then at that point, it would then tap into these dollars to use to fund the construction payments of that over time. And so generally speaking, it doesn't necessarily have to be, and I'll ask Mr. Barth to correct me if I'm wrong, it doesn't, in order to get into the UTP, it doesn't have to necessarily be developed to a certain point. People had to have conceptualized the project and met locally to advance it, but there's no requirement that certain number of parcels have been acquired or a percentage of engineering has to have been done.
So I guess as an example, the widening of I-10 in downtown El Paso, what we're referring to it as a trench, is that an example of what you're talking about, where it's right now in its conceptual stage?
Correct, and so it would be eligible to receive funding within the next 10 years of the UTP, and if it were to then get added into the UTP, that would then kickstart, if you will, the environmental process, any right-of-way acquisition that would be needed, any engineering work that would need to occur to get that project ready to then award it through bid to contract in a later year.
So for that project, there's I guess my question is, for that project, the funding, does that have to be, and I understand it would come out of Category 12, would it have to be approved this year? Or it can be, I think I heard you say, any time during the 10-year period?
Correct. And so one thing, many of our projects that are in the UTP have funding from a number of different categories. And so the I-10 project may have funding from Category 2, which is generally controlled by the Metropolitan Planning Organization, and they select priorities through a funding allocation to go for that. They may not have enough to fully fund it, so then they could come to the Commission and ask for funding out of Category 12. It may also be eligible for a part of the connectivity, this regional or urban congestion in Category 4. And additionally, since it would be rebuilding some of the existing lanes, it might also be eligible for some funding out of Category 1. And if it's rebuilding some of the bridges that may have not scored all that well, it might be eligible for Category 6. So I'm sorry for the long-winded answer, but it's probably going to be a number of different funding categories that would be brought forward.
All right. Thank you, sir.
And
Thank you,
that's
Mr. Chairman.
also working through your local MPO. They typically are working, 10 years out. They're trying to estimate what the revenues are in that area and see if it's got to be performance-based. It's got to really rank high. That one probably would. But locally, you'll have to decide whether or not you want to use that money for that project. And then it goes through an approval process up the deal, but it starts at the local level.
And I apologize, your last question was, it could be considered and included in the UTP this year. Generally speaking, the Commission adopts a new UTP every August. It's a very lengthy process, and so even though it's going to be adopted in August, we're probably already 2 or 3 months into that process with the districts and MPOs. But should it not be selected this year, it would obviously be eligible for the following year or any year thereafter.
Down the line. All right.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Any other questions? Then I had a couple. Back when we were earlier in the presentations on the fatalities and stuff, 33% were alcohol related. I'm assuming that also includes drugs. Somebody's out.
Yes, just under the influence, I think.
Under the influence. 25% unrestrained, 12% distracted driver, That's 58, okay, that's not 100%, so.
Yeah, and so you highlight a point, in these crash records that we receive from law enforcement, they will mention primary factors that led into that, and so there may be more than just one. So if someone was distracted and under the influence, both of those are going to show up, and so if you add all the percentages up, it will add up to more than 100%, because some accidents have more than just one cause.
The reason I bring that up is an issue we had last session is whether or not what we're doing with inspection stations and the vast number of man-hours lost by the traveling public taking a vehicle to get inspected to make sure we have safe cars on the road, is that really worth it? And, there's different thoughts on that, but there's a lot of man-hours and a lot of, if it's not really contributing. We're not finding a lot of data. We're finding some minuscule data that's almost, well, anyway. And so it's probably going to be an issue again this session.
Yeah, it's a health science issue.
Well,
It's an issue.
he's not here, but it is an issue.
He brought it forward.
Yeah, he brought it forward, and it will be coming forward again this session, I can assure you. And so you don't have a category for that, or is my question?
No, or it doesn't show up in the numbers. So for 2017, you said 33% were alcohol related. There were 25% unrestrained. 18% were pedestrians and bicyclists. 20% were related to an intersection. 13% were motorcycles, and 12% was distracted driving.
Second question, in the sunset process, one of the things that was identified last session is, I think I'm just going by memory, MMP. It was that big
MPPM?
system. MPPM. Okay. It's very important to have that. It's a great control tool because you've got all the pieces of your planning in different systems right now. Now, the idea was to merge them, but it's very complicated. They also said it was high risk. Can you give us a little progress report on that?
Yeah, so that program is progressing. In fact, we're going to release that system in a number of releases. Release 1 started yesterday. So we had the first release in our Waco district, our finance division, our design division. So things are progressing on that. Our next, we're going to skip a week for letting, because our letting is next week, and then we're going to continue release 1 to the other districts across the state. August of this year will be release 2, so we're fully expected to, in fact, in August, once we release 2, none of our users will be using our old mainframe system anymore, so we're really looking forward to that.
All right, so it's progressing. Third thing, members, I know people in your district will ask, well, what's the status of this project? And of course, the simple answer is you can call us, or your office can call TxDOT, but they mentioned it, and there was a lot to cover. At Project Tracker, you can go to their website, you can plug in the address and parameters, and you get a lot of answers.
And it will show projects that are currently under construction as well as those that are planned in the future.
Yeah. So when people say, well, when's this going to happen? You can find that just by getting on the website. What's this? Project Tracker.
Yeah.
Yeah. You just go to their website.
Yeah, texdot.gov/PT, I think, and it'll take you right there.
Senator Kokorst?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question, speaking of Project Tracker. I want to say, to begin, thank you for all your work and the many employees that gave so much after Hurricane Harvey and moving debris and just, lights, signs, everything that we went through. Overall, how are we on highway conditions in the hurricane-ravaged areas, which go from Port Arthur down to Port Aransas? How do you feel?
We feel good. Any damage to roadways has already been repaired. We didn't really have significant damage. We had some bridges that needed work, and that Most of that work is complete, some of it's ongoing.
And did we get any FEMA funding for that, or how when we have that kind of disaster? We've had several floods. I mean, it wasn't just Harvey. It was, you remember, Waller County had 3 floods in 18 months. I think Houston the same. So, how's that FEMA match?
So we receive some funding from FEMA, but then also from Federal Highways. Federal Highways has an emergency relief program that is above and beyond what we would normally get. And so from FEMA, we ultimately expect about, call it 44 million of reimbursements, but from Federal Highways, we expect about 70 million of reimbursements, and we fully expect to get all of that. We're in process now, but we fully expect to get all of that reimbursed.
And then finally, I think it was on slide, I'm not going to find it, maybe. Slide 17 on your exceptional items. So I just did a quick add up on construction, and it looks like it comes to about 243 million if you take the district as well, and your land acquisitions. If you were to get some of that, and I know Senator Hancock has an oversight kind of committee that's looking at that, but could you really spend 243 at one time, or would you need that to roll out?
So I think we would be able to get it under contract in there, and then some of the expenditures may happen, in following years. But we look at that very carefully. We don't want to ask for money and then not be able to get it under contract. And so we think that all the numbers on here we would be able to get under contract by the end of next biennium.
And it all comes out of State Highway Fund?
Yes.
And the Austin campus, I see, is 23.8.
Yeah, and that is, as Mr. Ragland stated, that would be, if you would maybe think of it as like a 20-year mortgage. So the Texas Public Finance Authority would issue bonds to build the construction, then the department would make payments to Texas Public Finance Authority over 20 years. And one of the reasons we decided to take that approach is, with a budget as large as ours, we could probably make a one-time payment and be done. But our mission is not to build buildings. Our mission is to build highways. And so by stretching those payments out over 20 years, we think it allows more money to go towards building highways, building the transportation system, rather than
So all
a campus.
in cost on the Austin campus would be what?
So the estimate in the rider is around $326 million in total. There are a number of components.
Is that with land? Is that with land?
The land has already been acquired, and the land was acquired for under $10 million. I think it was
$9-ish, I think.
About $9 million for the land. So we will own the land and the buildings ultimately, which is different than our current situation at Riverside, where oddly enough we own the buildings but we lease the land.
Yeah, I want to see that contract, and I want to know who it was with. Roll of eyes here.
It's facilities
that was a bad deal.
Yeah, and
bad deal for Texas.
And there was some intervention back in those days.
Oh yeah, the answer to that question was bullet.
Bad deal for Texas.
Hey, I wasn't here.
What the chairman said.
330, 340 for the new campus.
Correct. And there's one of the parts of that, roughly about $40 million, is a laboratory where we, some of our staff test materials before they go into our projects to make sure they're meeting specifications. That laboratory right now is kind of in the Cedar Park area. We would like to bring it to the consolidated campus, and that additional cost is around $40 million. But if we look at all of the parcels of land that the department owns around that laboratory near Cedar Park, the estimated revenue from that is around $40 million. And so it would seemingly be a wash, but it would get that that group. Right now, the next closest office is probably 15 miles away. It would get them on the same campus.
Still keep the Greer building here.
Yes, this would have nothing to do with the Greer building whatsoever. We would continue.
Easier access for us to y'all, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank y'all very much.
Yes.
If somebody does have a question, they'll be happy to follow up with your office. So we're going to go to the Texas Department of Public Safety next. Call up Lieutenant Colonel Skylar Hearn and Ron Joy, Chief, Texas Highway Patrol Division. And members, it's our intention to be out of here before 10:15. Marquis, what is this? I don't have enough space up here for this. Isn't this the same thing we have here?
I don't know.
It's a more readable version.
You got enough space for that. I don't run out of room.
Yeah.
I think that's the same thing as this. Is that the same thing we already have in our folder?
It's just a more readable version for you in case the other one.
We only have limited
Yes,
space
sir.
up here. Go ahead and state your name for the record and
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Skylar Hearn, Deputy Director, DPS.
Ron Joy, Chief, Texas Highway Patrol.
good to see you.
We're going to lead off with Chief Joy.
Okay.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, fellow members. It's my pleasure to speak with you today. As I stated, my name is Ron Joy. I have the honor of serving as the Chief of the Texas Highway Patrol. The Texas Highway Patrol Division is the largest division in the Department of Public Safety. We're made up of over 3,200 commissioned members and over 600 non-commissioned members. I'll give you a little bit of brief about what we've been doing and what our concerns are. The Texas Troopers play a vital role and make a significant impact in saving lives every day. Whether it's removing impaired drivers from the highway or removing dangerous commercial vehicles or commercial vehicle drivers from the highway, these efforts greatly improve the safety of the citizens of Texas. Without the intervention of a trooper, these dangerous drivers and vehicles cause serious consequences to our citizens and their families. To put this in perspective as something we can all relate to, every year in Texas, more lives are lost due to fatal crashes on our roadways than we lost on that fateful day we refer to as 9/11. Our troopers proactively engage in high-visibility patrol efforts to deter, prevent, and detect those demonstrating those bad driving behaviors. Protecting our citizens and our communities also involves actively assisting those motorists who find themselves on the side of the road due to a flat tire, out of gas, or from a traffic crash. Last year, our troopers assisted over 46,000 motorists who needed assistance on the side of the road and investigated over 74,000 traffic crashes. The dangers to our citizens and our first responders while on the side of the road cannot be overstated. From January of 2016 through August of 2018, our troopers alone have been rear-ended 42 times from drivers who are either impaired or distracted. And one of those instances cost the life of Trooper Thomas Nipper on November the 4th, 2017. Responding to those in need on our highways also creates opportunities to prevent further incidents. Due to the increase in population in Texas, the highway infrastructure has become increasingly congested, as you all know. Traffic congestion alone can lead to increased incidents of road rage and dangerous driving behavior, such as following at unsafe distances, passing in unsafe and prohibited areas, and becoming involved in a verbal or physical altercation. When a traffic obstruction such as a crash, disabled vehicle, or road hazard occurs, this can dramatically impact delays and congestion. Our troopers are all trained and practice traffic incident management tactics, and when used effectively, these tactics can improve traffic congestion and prevent further incidents. Our troopers are also often the first on the scene of an event, whether it's a natural disaster like Hurricane Harvey, the Santa Fe school shooting, or a vehicle crash. So not only are our troopers highly trained to respond to violent encounters, they are all now also highly trained and equipped to provide the critical life-saving care needed. Our troopers are trained on providing tactical emergency casualty care to those in need, and in the last 2 years alone, over 40 department members have been awarded life-saving awards due to their training and their exceptional efforts. Thanks to the large support from our Texas Legislature, our Lieutenant Governor, our Governor, our troopers today are better prepared and equipped than they've ever been before to face the threats and to serve the citizens of Texas. I thank you so much for your continued support, and I'd be happy to answer any questions from you.
Thanks. Okay.
The other topic the Chairman requested to talk about is driver's license. The driver's license function was given to the department in 1937. Today, the driver's license division is the second largest division in the Department of Public Safety. We have 229 locations around the state that range from 42 station mega centers to one-person offices that are scheduled one day a week. We are allotted approximately 2,200 FTEs for the division, with 1,800 of those being field employees and approximately 400 at headquarters doing record maintenance on over 22 million licensed individuals. In FY18, we did 7.4 million transactions. 5.4 million of those transactions were online eligible. 3.8 million of those 4.5 came in our office anyway. One of the issues we deal with. That includes, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, you might do those numbers one more time.
I'm sorry. 7.4 million total transactions. 5.4 million of them were online eligible, and 3.8 million of the 5.4 chose to come in the office. And we have some information about that shortly. 12 years ago, this was what the transaction looked like to get a driver's license. This was skills and knowledge and eligibility to drive a car. Over the last 12 years, through statutory requirements, federal real ID requirements, that's what you have to do when you come in to get a license. Roughly 90% of what we do when you come in is not skills, knowledge, and driving testing. It is establishing a national identity card for you, verifying citizenship and/or lawful presence, allowing you the opportunity to contribute to statutory funding, special benefit funds, registering you to vote, before we ever get to the are you eligible and can you drive a car. And that's what's impacted some of our ability to do so in an efficient manner. This is included in your handout. I just had provided the larger view because sometimes the font is a little tight. In the handouts we provided you, you will see maps of our locations around the state for both regular driving and CDL testing. Again, these packets are in there for every type of license issuance. There's specific information on CDL testing and the impacts that federal law has had on that for us, especially since 2016. There's a tab in there. We talk a lot about what we're not doing or unable to do well, which has merit, but we also want to talk about what we have done since the 81st session to make improvements, partly because of the fortunate resources the legislature provide us and the ingenuity of staff in creating efficiencies. So there's about 8 pages of improvements we've made over the last 10 years. And then the last tab is our plan of what we would do to improve the program with the exceptional item we asked for. And I can answer any questions along that line.
Yes, thank you. Can you tell me what your marketing campaign is to educate individuals that they're able to perform this task online, since 2/3 of the people coming in, waiting in line, then calling us complaining about coming in and waiting in line?
Yes, sir.
Don't even have to come in. What's your marketing campaign to educate them on the fact that they can do this?
We have done regular marketing of Twitter, social media through our media relations group.
Do you know who you target?
We are trying to target several groups. We varied the information so that we're meeting different users of different products. Okay. We have Facebook, we have Twitter.
Are you micro-targeting individuals?
I'm sorry. When you say that, probably.
You can target, my guess is you have the data, right, on when their driver's license are due, and frankly, you can probably micro-target based on due dates, individuals, so that
yes,
you're not doing it in a broad way.
Well, we're micro-targeting you specifically when you're eligible online. Your renewal information clearly says that you can
That's actually astonishing, because I was up this time and had to come back the next day.
I know you had a
because I wasn't
2-day
up.
experience. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and I never, and I'm on social media more than I should be, I can confess, and I never got anything.
Well, apparently we're not hitting the right
So
markets
I
then.
think that's,
We're also working with DIR because the online program is DIR's program.
yeah, I don't know that they're marketing experts on that.
We actually asked the vendor of Texas IGov to do a survey for us in the fall of customers who came in recently that were online eligible and why they chose to come in the office. And 91% of the people they marketed said they were aware that they had the online option but chose to come in anyway. The top reasons they provided in that survey were 22% wanted to update a photo, which is a technology solution we're trying to address. 19% did not want to share personal information online. 19% wanted to speak to a person. And a combination of 28%, 14% in two categories, do not want to pay an online convenience fee or do not want to pay more for an online transaction.
So we charge extra for an online transaction?
Yes, sir.
It should be the opposite. It should be the other way around.
It goes to Texas.
It's not a DPS fee.
It goes to DIR's.
And so we're charging online, and the consequence is that we need to hire more FTEs. So it's more expensive if they come in, frankly.
I think there's $1 extra charge for the convenience fee.
And it raises how much revenue?
I believe somewhere around 35 million that goes for DIR.
And it goes to DIR.
It's not, yes.
All right.
Center West?
But a part of that goes to the vendor also, right?
I'm sorry?
Also, we have an outside vendor that manages that program.
There is, correct.
And so part of that fee goes to the vendor.
I hate to talk out of turn for DIR. I believe under their new contract, they're having to pay the vendor a flat fee, so all of that funding comes to them so they can maintain that system.
Okay. Well, wait a minute. Mr. Chairman, just another question. In terms of DPS's role in terms of voter registration,
yes, sir.
Are you conversing with that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, kind of walk us through the registration process and how it then flips over to the Secretary of State's office and who's responsible for what checks and balances.
Sure. So if you come in the office for transaction and you're determined to be a U.S. citizen and you want to vote, we complete your voter registration, and that's submitted daily in a batch to the Secretary of State's office.
Okay, and before a person is eligible to register to vote, you have to determine, DPS determines that they are in fact eligible to vote. They are a citizen, is that correct?
Citizenship eligibility only. We're not in the driver's license office, we're not determining if you have any other voting restrictions.
Yeah, like felony records,
yes,
anything like
yes,
that. All right, so citizenship is determined prior to sending the information over to you.
Correct.
Okay. And if that's the only issue concerning registration, then that person is eligible to vote, correct?
Correct.
How often, and I assume that you do it by batch?
Yes, sir.
And how often are those batches done?
Daily.
That's what David Williams with DPS was bad.
Okay. Well, I mean, let's back up with Secretary. This you let me know if it's beyond. But with David Whitley, there were some issues.
That's beyond.
That's beyond.
Okay. Beyond.
No, you're on the right track.
I don't know when I get another shot at this though. That's
what we were kind of talking about. Go ahead.
Okay. So I'm trying to understand what was the confusion between DPS and the Secretary of State's office.
There was a miscommunication between...
obviously, it was a miscommunication.
Between staff on the terminology that we use for driver's licensing and the terminology of verification. Because on an application, the applicant self-reports initially whether they are a citizen or not. You check yes or no. There was a question asked specifically, do you verify whether that person's a citizen through DHS? And the answer to that is no. There is no U.S. citizen database. That created a confusion that we don't verify citizenship, which we do. If you check yes, you have to provide some documentation of a certified birth certificate or other required documentation that we say yes, you are. So from that conversation where a question was asked and a question was answered correctly, it got off track that lawful presence should be what we look at because that's verified through DHS, which is also true, but again, as has been reported, if you get naturalized in a 6-year term, somewhere in the middle, there's no requirement to come back to DPS and report that you've been naturalized. The next time you come in, if you have documentation, been naturalized, we will change your citizenship flag to yes, but the lawful presence flag never changes. It's a historical record.
I didn't understand a word you just said.
There was a reliance on the lawful presence establishment, even though citizenship was available on the record.
So in other words, it should be another box? Is that what you're saying?
There isn't. The box is there.
For naturalized?
Citizenship, yes or no?
I'm on to her next.
But
just like, go ahead.
Okay, I need to flush this out just a few minutes because I still don't understand it.
Okay.
Yeah. What I'm hearing is that there's a box that you check citizen or non-citizen.
When you apply, yes.
You apply. And if you say non-citizen, then you have to
produce documents that show you're legally present in the United States. So a visa, student visa, green card, something that we then verify through the Department of Homeland Security.
Okay, and that verification process, aren't you able to determine whether they're going through a naturalization process?
Not necessarily, no. It just determines their lawful presence and their term. If it's a student visa, say for 4 years, then we issue that person a 4-year document, a driver's license, let's say, that expires at the same term as their lawful presence document.
But that does not enable them to then get on the voter registration roll, right?
Correct, it does not.
So how do you determine whether a person is going through a naturalization process?
The only way DPS knows is if that person comes back in and updates their credential that we issue. So if you are here on a student visa, the document we provide you, the driver's license, on the face of it has a limited term designation because you are on a limited term here. But some people, once they're naturalized, want to have a regular looking license, so they'll come back in. When they show proof of that, we change their citizenship flag from no to yes.
So let me ask this question. This is my last question. If a person is going through a naturalization process, that person is still considered a non-citizen?
Correct.
Okay, and that person should not be in our voter registration file?
Correct.
Okay. Were any naturalized citizens sent to the Secretary of State's office? Any citizens going through the naturalization process?
Going through the process, I'm not aware. We're not aware of who's going through the process.
Well, let me back. That's a very good response. Poor question. There should not have been any persons that identified as going through the naturalization process that would have been transmitted over to the Secretary of State's office for purposes of voter registration eligibility. Is that correct? That's a pretty good question. It was compound, but it was pretty good.
Based on the request to identify those with the lawful presence flag, the information we provided included those that were also listed as a U.S. citizen who had become citizens at some point in their process.
They become a citizen at some point in their process?
Yes.
Because they came back in and identified themselves? Okay. All right. So everyone that you guys sent over there had gone through the process that you have in DPS to verify citizenship?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Alvarado.
Good morning. Thank you. In Mr. Whitley's hearing at the Nominations Committee, which I sit on, he stated that he received the data that was in his press release from DPS. Did y'all double check the list? Was it scrubbed before you sent it to the Secretary of State's office?
No, ma'am. We provided the data requested. We were not involved in any of the analysis.
So how was the list compiled? Because there are so many missing parts to this, this situation that's occurred. Your office compiles the list.
Specifically on this request, it started in March of 18.
Okay, and that's the lawful presence list? Is that what it's?
That was what was requested at the end. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. The part that puzzles me is that we passed the law in 2013 that allowed for this compilation of data to be shared, right, between DPS and the Secretary of State's office.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that was 2013. When did this list start to be compiled?
The specific request was made in March of 2018.
Several years later. And the request came from who?
Secretary of State's office, the election office.
Okay. And that would have been, I'm trying to think, which secretary was that? Under?
Pablos.
Under Pablos?
Yes, ma'am.
Who then resigned sometime after, shortly after, I think.
I'm not familiar with
Okay.
his exit.
Well, I'm just trying to narrow down what, why it took so long for this list to be compiled and what prompted it in March of 2018 to be put together.
I'm not completely familiar. I understand there might have been a hearing at some point in February or March about voter rolls.
Okay.
But the request to DPS came in March. The initial request was for all data we had on foreign nationals in our driver's license system, and we provided that list of approximately 4.5 million records, including inactive records, and then we were asked to change that to a different data set because I believe the information, there was too much information, and because it contained old records that were inactive, they just wanted active records. And that's where this conversation about do you verify citizenship got crossways, and the request for lawful presence as the main identifier was requested.
Okay. The vendor that helped to compile this data, was that vendor contracted through you or the Secretary of State's office?
That's the Secretary of State's.
Okay, well, now I'm a little more confused because according to the Secretary of State, I was told that part of the reason this took so long to get this list going is because there was a problem with the vendor, and the vendor was through your office.
Well, the second request that was made in April, what was asked of us required a change to our driver's license database to run the query as requested. And because we have so many improvements and iterations of IT work on our driver's license system, our initial response to the Secretary of State's office is that we could, so this was in April, that we could,
2018?
Of 2018, that we could look at talking about this request in our October IT meeting for DL improvements, and that we could probably get them the information by December once that new query and systems were in place. So we had to make improvements or changes to our internal database to get the data as requested.
And who is the vendor? Is it PCC? Or
The vendor? DPS. We run our own system there. Again, we were just asked to pull our own data out in a certain fashion and then provide it. We didn't perform any of the analysis or work on the data.
Okay. I know that other states have had some trial and error when they've relied on the list from the driver's license, because I guess in most states too, your driver's license isn't renewed for several years, and then within that gap of time, people do become naturalized citizens.
Yes.
And there's no way for you to know that.
Correct.
Okay. And what is the code 64?
It was new to us. Apparently, that is the code given through the registrars for someone who registers to vote through DPS. So when they receive it, they know that's where it originated from.
And that Code 64 was included on the lawful presence list, is that right?
It was unknown to us. I believe from their end, they could tell that that's where the names came from.
So how were you not, how is it unknown to you if it's the indicator that applicant, it originated in your office?
We're basically a one-way system. We register you to vote, and we send it, and that's the end of our part of it. We're not familiar with their codes and transactions that they label the various registration methods from. Okay. So, but there was no Code 64 on the information we provided. We just provided individuals.
Okay. So Code 64 is their indication
yes,
that it originated with you?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, because when I asked the Secretary of State what was Code 64, he was not aware of what it was. So, okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. So basically, as I see it, you've got, when they go in to get a driver's license, you'll have legally present, because you've got a visa or something like that, or citizenship confirmed.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then the person who's legally present might have several years, before they have to come in and renew it. But in the meantime, if they go get their citizenship, become naturalized citizens, you're still showing them over here as legally present but not citizen, unless they come back to you and say, I want to update my driver's license, I'm now legally. Is that right?
Yes, sir. And even in that scenario, the original lawful presence verification for record retention and real ID, well, it doesn't change. We just now add your naturalization document and make you a citizen.
Yeah. So if you're trying to compare the two lists, and so the Secretary of State's over here with the list showing this is what we're showing legally able to vote, and your list is popping up not citizenship but legally present. You'll have you'll be out of sync.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. Yeah. A couple of questions, because it all sounds really simple, but let's just go from the beginning. So, when was the last time you updated the database?
Our database? Mm-hmm. But it's updated daily with new transactions.
Okay. Have you changed over a database? Have you changed system?
2009 was when we upgraded the driver's license system.
You upgraded the driver's license system, and then sounds like that what was requested was sounds simple here, and what sounded simple has gotten complicated. Can you tell me how large of a data set that you sent to the Secretary of State? How many columns? How much information? The Code 64, you're almost making it sound like now that Secretary of State created a new column and put Code 64 in a column, but I don't know why they would do that when you're providing the information. It seems like the Code 64 would come from DPS based on how databases are established. But go ahead and answer the question on how much bulk was there in the data that you sent Secretary of State?
It was about 2 million total records of individuals, and those records, if you did it in a spreadsheet, which is kind of what they were provided, I forget the number of columns, but it was name, address.
Ballpark number of columns?
10, 15 columns.
Okay, and they were asking for how much information?
The two main issues at hand that we provided were lawful presence and citizenship. So we gave the indication of both. So they were basically asking for
maybe 4 columns, and you sent 15?
Well, they were asking for all of the documentation that goes with the lawful presence piece. So who they are, all their identifiers that we have, so that they could, because we're talking biographical to biographical, trying to make sure if they're using other data in their comparison to what we give them, you have the most information to do a biographical match.
I'm just thinking, it seems like they were asking for somewhat simple information, but yet got a very complicated data set sent to them. Would that sound accurate?
I want to hear this.
It was a spreadsheet of names, dates of birth, addresses.
So 15 columns.
Citizenship, lawful presence,
Right, it's 15 columns.
Yeah.
Right.
I can go back and verify.
And then they shared information that was provided from your office and subsequently dealt the consequences of the information that you provided. Is that accurate?
That's one way to view it, yes, sir.
Well, how would you rephrase that then?
We provided the requested information that they asked for in the form they asked for it.
Should they have been able to count on that information? Did you see anything in a press release that would cause you to say, don't do that, that's not what we gave you?
Post-event or pre?
Well, my guess is post-event, you wish it never happened. Since it all came from
Since it all came about, what we have done is we have...
Where did it come from first, before we talk about how it came about? Where did the information come from?
The driver's license database.
Okay, and what was presented was purely what was given, right?
I understand, based on information, that they have a vendor that they took our information.
Well, you would almost have to when you're given 15 columns and how many?
2 million records.
How many rows? So 2 million records, 2 million rows, 15 columns. Seems like you'd have to send somebody to parse that data, the data that y'all provided, in order to come up with a list. Would you agree?
I believe that's correct.
And I mean, and so they didn't create anything new. They just took the information you got and parsed it out to provide the information that they had asked you for, that you provided with. How many again?
The total records?
Yes.
2 million.
Okay.
Plus.
And out of the 2 million records that you sent them, how many did they come up with, Senator West?
I think it was 95,000.
95,000.
So you sent them significantly more information than they requested, and therefore had to go to an outside vendor to narrow it down to produce a list based on your information.
No, I would say that's a no, because we worked together on what the project plan was, and we gave them exactly the information they requested.
Did you give them more than the information they requested?
No, sir.
But you gave them 2 million names, and they came up with significantly fewer names that was sent, therefore, then to cities and counties to get more accurate information to narrow that list to even fewer names, but you gave them everything they asked for.
Exactly what they asked for, yes, sir.
Exactly. More than they asked for?
No, sir, exactly.
So they asked for 2 million names and 15 columns.
They asked for all active records, and every column on the spreadsheet was what they requested.
Senator West.
Just one other question along this line. And you update your records, right?
Yes.
Okay, and so if someone is going through the citizenship process and they identify as a non-citizen, then when they come back, they are a citizen, then they're put into the database, right?
Well,
as eligible to vote.
Their new naturalization document, whatever that may be, is retained, and the system is changed from no to yes for citizenship.
So when they first present, they present as a person going through the naturalization process. Right.
No, sir. Usually that's not. They just present themselves as a lawfully present individual.
Okay, and so does that record go into the
yes, these are their past, whatever they have.
Hold on. And so then when they come back, is that initial record updated, or is it another transaction?
That initial record stays as a historical record. When they come back in, the new document showing their naturalization is recorded, and it's a separate folder within the system.
So a person could literally have two documents in the system then? Sent over to
yes, they will have. If you were originally a foreign national, lawfully present, you will have that documentation. If you become naturalized, you will have that documentation separate.
And so both of those documents could have been sent to the Secretary of State's office for the same person?
Both individuals that had both those documents were sent in, yes.
Okay. All right. I want to go to something else. Two other things, Mr. Chairman.
Several things to go to.
Okay, yes, sir.
We're going to run out of time.
I understand.
I'm trying to keep us from having to come back this afternoon.
Well, I understand. I agree with you. In terms of the shortage of employees, is the shortage of employees associated with the driver's license offices?
With the
driver's license offices?
The shortage?
Right.
Yes. Yes, we believe we are understaffed in order to maintain and operate effectively the 229 locations we have around the state.
Okay. And then secondly, last session we passed Senate Bill 30, Community Safety Education Act, that
Yes, sir.
dealt with behavior expectation of officers and citizens. And I asked for consideration of putting at least some of the have at least a couple of questions on the driver's license test concerning
Yes, sir.
that area. Were you able to do that?
Yes, sir, we did that.
Okay. Can you measure the effectiveness of what we did last session concerning that? Or was it too early?
I think it's too early, but we can do some checking to see, maybe surveying some of our applicants to see if they're responding to those specific parts of the test.
It'd be interesting in whether or not they are answering the questions correctly, too, based on the content that we put in the driver's license manual.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I'd like to move on to the next thing. But before, the last thing I want to say is, that's where our lines are at the driver's license offices.
Yes, sir.
We all get a lot of complaints on it. In addition to, I recall there's about 20,000 phone people call in, of which 5,000 get answered or something like that. Is that?
We average about 25,000 calls a day.
Of the FTEs you are appropriated and approved for, there's about 200 that are empty slots that you're trying to hire them.
That is correct.
Those 200, if we really ought to put a push to get them hired. But members, what they're also asking for is $400 million every 2 years extra for a whole bunch of more employees to go to these driver's license office and process the thing where 70% of these people can do it online at home or in a library. 70%. And I would like for you to get for this committee what your marketing plan is for getting that information out to the public, because most people don't know it. It ought to be on billboards, it ought to be in newspapers, it ought to be all kinds of stuff. Instead of spending $400 million every 2 years for more people, you could take a fraction of that and really put a campaign out there and educate the public. You can do this at home. Now, I saw you went over your survey. Well, people don't want to share some of this stuff, but they're willing to get online and go shopping.
Yes, sir.
And they put the credit cards out there and all that other kind of stuff. So, do you have another question?
About
Senator
something
Alvarado.
along those lines, Mr. Chairman. So I was just thinking, when it's time for your license to be renewed, maybe it would be helpful if you have emails, because that's the way most of us communicate now, as opposed to snail mail. But we don't get something from DPS on email indicating that our license is up for renewal.
Email, we're trying to move that direction because we recognize that people may move 4 or 5 times in their life, but they usually won't change their Hotmail or their Gmail or their Yahoo once they establish that. And so if you are voluntarily providing it to us when you apply, we try to use that.
Because all you get is
that's different from
the snail mail.
Yes, ma'am.
Asking you to, and somewhere in there I know it says you can go and register online, but I think an email would be probably the best way to do it and more cost-effective way.
We were looking at that.
I mean, it seems like having somebody's email would be kind of a common sense thing. I mean, you've got list of all the other information that we've been talking about for the last 20 minutes.
There's a lot of things they can do they're not doing that would prevent us from having to spend an extra $400 million every 2 years in perpetuity.
Is there any way we can look at some sort of discount for those persons that are using snail mail?
I've just asked them to bring a marketing campaign and any ideas they had to this committee.
$400 million.
We need to have a more conversation on this.
Okay.
And I know it's going to be in Article 5. Virgil's going to spend a lot of time on this very issue as well. But I'd like to move to the commercial driver's license.
Yes, sir.
As a quick background, we used to have 125 locations where you could get your commercial driver's license. Because the feds changed their rules, we had to update our rules. We went from 125 to 25, and then we started having a backlog. We asked y'all to outsource more of this? It
Yes,
looks
sir.
like you're making progress. Can you touch on that for just a second?
Yes, sir. Where we went to 25, we are now up to 30 DPS locations, and we have 75 third-party testers around the state. And you have a map of that in your packet that shows the CDL testing and which ones are which.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's very important. Have we noticed the backlog slowing down or the wait time getting shorter?
To a degree, the problem that we have is with about 50% of those that schedule a CDL skills test don't show up or fail or do something that 2-hour window that was scheduled gets unused. And so
You mentioned that.
we have a hot list of people that will be willing to be on standby, and we'll reach out to those if we have room. But that's.
Is there a confirmation notification maybe 24 hours ahead of time whether or not they confirm they're going to be there so you can reach down to the hot list?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions related to DPS they'd like to bring up?
Just one other.
Senator West. West and then Rodriguez.
Okay, how are body cameras? How's the deployment of body cameras working for DPS?
I'll let Chief George speak to that.
Thank you for your leadership in that, Senator West. The body cameras that we implemented last year have been very good for us. Not only have they proved beneficial in showing the point of view of the officer, but there's been several indications of several complaints made that the body camera video alone completely exonerated the officer. So they've been really, really good. They've been great for prosecution.
Just one follow-up. Have we seen the number of complaints decrease as a result of the use of the body cameras?
No, sir.
All right.
Senator Rodriguez.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to follow up on your comments about people using the computer online to register and get their driver's licenses. Part of the problem with that is it depends, it seems to me, on the particular area. In my case, Presidio County, for example, down in Presidio, the driver's license office was closed down for a while, and then finally, after hue and cry, it opened up with 2 days. And each day, I just had Presidio County days this week, as you know, and I had the county judge and people up here, and they were telling me about how in those 2 days they were getting upwards of 40, 50 people coming up to get their driver's license, and they feel very strongly down there that they need to have a full-time person to assist because of in part because of the distances, geography, and so I just wanted to point out there's a lot of other considerations that we should take into account. I support the idea of the online because that saves money, but not everybody really gets online. You said they go shopping, but I'm talking about people who just don't get online at all.
That's a large number of people.
And in that case, I certainly would argue that we need a full-time person there. And I know you want to cut down on those offices, but we have a real tremendous need for that part of the world.
They had identified about 87 offices that are out there that is very low volume, and they agreed to keep them open. We were concerned. A lot of people that represent rural areas were concerned they might close them. They agreed not to close them, and we're trying to work some of this stuff out during the session.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thank y'all very much. If anybody has any additional questions, I'm sure they'll be happy to come to your office and provide it. Thank y'all very much. We'll call Whitney Brewster. Texas Department of Motor Vehicles. Oh, we have a resource. And as a resource, we have Jeremiah Kuntz and Jimmy Archer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify before you this morning about the Texas Department of Motor Vehicles. My name is Whitney Brewster. I'm the Executive Director of the department. I'm also joined today by our Vehicle Title and Registrations Division Director, Jeremiah Kuntz, as well as our Motor Carrier Division Director, Jimmy Archer. I've been asked to provide an overview of the agency. I am aware of your desire to wrap up by 10:15, and I will be very sensitive to that to allow y'all to have plenty of time to ask any questions that you have. The agency is coming up on its 10th anniversary. We were established by the 81st Legislature, and a lot has happened since that time. We have made it our goal to improve the customer experience through innovation, through being performance-driven and being customer-centric. To perform these functions, and you can find these on pages 1 and 2 of your written testimony, we have organized ourselves into several programs and support divisions. Our largest division is the Vehicle Title and Registration Division. In addition to providing registration and titling services, they are also responsible for supporting our 254 county tax assessor collectors that in turn provide vehicle title and registration to the general public. In
Mr. Chairman, may I? I think we're supposed to be at the Senate floor at 10:30 for a panoramic.
Yes, sir. That's why I'm trying to make sure we're out here by 10:15.
Okay.
We're aware of that. Thank you.
On page 2 of our written testimony, you'll see that approximately 8 million titles were issued in FY18 and almost 25 million registrations. That makes Texas the second largest state in terms of volume for registration. Our motor vehicle division occupationally licenses and regulates vehicle manufacturers, distributors, converters, and leasing companies, as well as the dealers. And we have approximately 32,000 occupational licensees that we regulate. Our motor carrier division is responsible for regulating the motor carrier industry through the issuance of operating authority for almost 52,000 motor carrier companies across the state annually. We issued approximately 809,000 oversize overweight permits. And on page 5, you can see some trend information. That's a 15% increase in oversize overweight permit issuance over FY17. Our enforcement division supports all of these divisions to ensure compliance with the law. And our philosophy is to educate our licensees first before enforcement to increase compliance long term. We investigate complaints from any entity that submits them to us. We had over 11,000 complaints that were administratively investigated in FY18. Our Consumer Relations Division is the agency's contact center and the frontline resource for the public. The division served over 600,000 Texans last year and maintained a customer satisfaction rating of 93%. And that's despite the demand for those services increasing by over 50% over the last 6 years. Our Auto Burglary and Theft Prevention Authority is within the Tex DMV, and it provides grants to local law enforcement to combat auto burglary and theft. They administered over $12 million in local grants to law enforcement last year. The ABTPA task forces were responsible for the recovery of over 11,000 stolen vehicles and 3,300 arrests for motor vehicle thefts in FY18. Because of actions taken by the 85th Legislature, the department established our new Compliance and Investigations Division. I want to very much thank the Legislature for the support. We saw that there was a need in terms of working with law enforcement on criminal complaints that the agency receives or uncovers. As it pertains to titles and registrations, we have, since January 1 of 2018, with the partnership of law enforcement, we have opened more than 30 felony investigations, resulting in 22 felony arrests, and recovered nearly $1.1 million in stolen vehicles, fines, and restitutions and penalties. We've also responded to over 1,200 requests from law enforcement. And we've conducted more than 70 anti-fraud training courses across the state for tax assessor collectors, as well as law enforcement, on what to do when they believe that there is title fraud occurring. On page 5, you can see that the agency's revenue collections. With our tax assessor collector partners, we collected approximately $1.92 billion in total revenue for the state. And this includes deposits of approximately $1.64 billion to the State Highway Fund. There has been a 7% increase in revenue over FY17 in that area. Moving along to other activities that have been happening since the 85th legislature. For the first time since its creation, the agency is going through the sunset process. And I'm happy to report that it was adopted that we should be continued for another 12 years. Aside from the statutory recommendations laid out in Senator Buckingham's SB 604, the Commission also recommended 17 management actions. We have fully implemented approximately half of those, and we are on schedule to implement all of them within the timeframes listed in the recommendations. In September 2017, many areas, as you well know, were devastated by Hurricane Harvey. Our agency worked very closely with the governor's office to issue various waivers to ease the burden on the public, tax assessor collectors, and to ensure motor carriers could go to the locations to remove debris and deliver supplies. Thousands of vehicles were impacted by the flooding, and we saw a tremendous increase from October to December of 2017. We processed almost 219,000 salvage and non-repairable vehicle title applications, and that is almost 2.5 times more applications than were received in the same period the prior year. Some implementation of legislation that occurred. I will not go through all of it. It's listed on page 10, but some key items to mention. SB 2076, sponsored by Senator Rodriguez. Most significantly, there were various things in that bill, but most significantly to the agency was that the law was made clear about the most recently issued title. The certified copy of title is the only valid document. Prior to that legislation passing, if you came in and you got 5, all 5 held equal legal weight, which caused a lot of confusion and opportunities for fraud. I want to thank Senator Rodriguez and the support of the Transportation Committee and the full body for passing that legislation. An amendment to SB 26 required that the department, in coordination with the Department of Public Safety, that we study the efficiency and necessity of titling, registering, and inspecting vehicles. That report was submitted to the legislature on time. It was submitted December of 2018. Along that same vein, HB 1959 by Thomas of Harris required that the department conduct a study of alternative technologies for registration of commercial vehicles and to report to the legislature its findings. I am happy to say that we will be able to provide that study in March well, actually next month. There was an accelerated time frame recommended in our sunset report to have it submitted by March 31st. We will have that submitted to the legislature well before that time. SB 2075, also by Senator Rodriguez, contained a provision to allow the agency to offer the online registration renewal receipt to serve as proof of registration until 31 days following, to hopefully relieve the congestion in county tax assessor collectors that we often see at the last of the month when people are trying to rush in and get that sticker in their hand. So by having that, we are hoping that will alleviate some of the congestion in offices. 3 new oversized overweight permits were authorized. SB 1524 by Chairman Nichols created an annual overweight permit for sealed intermodal shipping containers. And that has been fully implemented to date. We have issued 169 of these permits. SB 1383 by Senator Perry authorized an annual overweight permit for the transportation of fluid milk. That too has been fully implemented. HB 2319 by Representative Patty included an amendment creating an annual overweight permit for sealed intermodal shipping containers only usable in Bowie County for a few miles of state road to allow transport from Arkansas through Texas to Louisiana, and to date 6 of those permits have been issued. Under transportation, looking forward, under Transportation Code, the Texas Department of Motor Vehicles Board does have the authority to make recommendations to the legislature for operational efficiencies. It did that in its October 4th board meeting and has brought those recommendations forward. You can see those listed on page 7 of your written testimony. I will not, again, go through all of those, but would like to call your attention to those items. I want to end by saying thank you very much for the support of this committee, and to also express that we very much look forward to working with you as we move forward to improve the services that we provide Texans. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Any questions to DMV? Any questions down here? On the Harvey, I kept hearing that we had about 500,000 cars went underwater. And how do we assure ourselves that those cars are tracked and gotten out of the system so that somebody can't just run them to a robo-wash and sell them?
So, thank you for that question. For those that we were notified about, we were able to promptly brand those titles. The salvage titles that I referred to, the 2.5 times the number over FY17, we were able to brand those titles and actually establish an expedited process for doing so with the insurance companies. We were able to do that within the statutory 5-day time frame, so that hopefully consumers would do a title check, which we have that service available on our website to do before someone purchases a new vehicle. Where there is
So you feel like the public's adequately protected there?
I'd like Jeremiah Kuntz to be able to address the part where we were not notified, where the agency has not been notified, and we are working with several members on different mechanisms for potentially closing the loophole on some of those vehicles.
So, for the record, Jeremiah Kuntz, Director of Vehicle Titles and Registration Division, Texas Department of Motor Vehicles. To answer that question, under state law, a insurance company is required to apply for a salvage title for a vehicle that they pay a claim on. Particularly in this instance, when there was flood damage, those insurance companies are required to apply for a salvage title, and therefore we would brand those titles as salvage with a flood brand on those. That flood brand continues on to any blue title that gets issued later on. If that vehicle gets rebuilt, that flood brand will continue on that title for its life. The place that there's a gap today is uninsured vehicles where a person does not have insurance or has liability-only coverage on their vehicle. In those instances, an insurance company is not paying a claim, and it is the responsibility of the owner of that vehicle to apply for salvage. Statute still requires them to do so, but there's not an enforcement mechanism to force them to make that application.
Okay. Did you have a question, Senator Hinojosa?
Just a real quick question. You talk about vehicles that were flooded. When I drive back to the valley, for example, I usually see a group of one pickup towing two other vehicles, and I'll see 3 or 4 of those at a time. What are they? I mean, they just salvage vehicles, so do you have any idea what they're doing?
A lot of times those could be salvage vehicles, they could be non-salvage vehicles, but I'm imagining you're the ones that say in tow, usually on the back window, they're headed south. Most likely those are what we refer to as export-only vehicles.
Okay.
If a vehicle is bought that is salvage or is being bought to be transported to another country, we brand those as export-only, which makes them ineligible to receive title in Texas if they're ever brought back into the state.
Okay, thank you.
On our relocation, are y'all settled in now?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, thank you for asking that question. Our motor carrier division moved from the Bull Creek property onto the Camp Hubbard property, which is owned by TxDOT. They renovated the top floor of one of the facilities, and our motor carrier division was able to move in time for that lease. Prior to the lease expiration.
So is everybody there now?
The whole family, headquarters family is together on one campus, yes, sir.
Found a home.
All right. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Members, that concludes our testimony for today. So there being no other business to come before the committee stands. Senator West, did you have something?
Executive Director, I need to see you.
Okay. There being no further business to come before the committee stands recessed, subject to call of the chair. Boom.